whether you believe Helen was actually conjuring spirits of the dead, or whether she was a con woman involved in some kind of fraud. Margaret's tried Freedom of Information Act requests, and it's come back not in the public interest. Even after 81 years, there's still things they don't want to talk about. And the shoulders of coat hangers, you can see quite clearly, you can even see the kinds of coat hangers that were used. These photographs were taken by someone called Harvey Metcalf in 1928, but they were never actually originally intended, at least this was the photographer's and original publisher's intention, was that these were never meant actually to be pictures of Helen in trance. An old Australian man, who was one of her guides, appeared in ectoplasmic form. He said, "I'm sorry to announce that a British battleship has just been sunk. I have 1,400 of her officers and men with me right now, newly arrived in the spirit world." And everyone was shocked. What? We didn't know anything about this. Now, by incredibly piece of bad luck on Helen's part, one of the people in the audience was a man called Brigadier Roy Firebrace, who was head of Army Intelligence for Scotland. He was also an occultist, a spiritualist, a member of the Scottish SPR, very, very keen on this particular subject, very, very interested in the paranormal. Section B19 was a human intelligence outfit that was specifically established to track down the source of rumours. It's kind of the institution that would be employed to run any kind of monitoring or surveillance operation on Helen Duncan. So, in a sense, Maud may well have been leading the surveillance operation against Helen Duncan and switched hats or put his wig on to prosecute her when she was finally in court. I feel that an injustice has been done, and I'd like to hopefully help put that right.
Without further ado this evening, Ben, please take to the stage. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everyone who is here this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben, and I'm a conspiracy theorist. I hope I'm at the right meeting. That doesn't mean I believe everything that's a conspiracy theory. Absolutely not. I don't believe the Earth is flat. I don't believe the moon is hollow. I don't believe that Lewis Hamilton's Barack Obama's son. I do have my limits, certainly. But I do have an interest in all the things that Caroline's just given in my bio. And I write about it on my website, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. And this was me, the portering Buddha. Yeah, I was a hospital porter. I was one for 23 years. And the way I lost my career, and it was ended, unceremoniously ended, it was a conspiracy, I believe. And I don't have time to give the details today, but there are distinct similarities between what happened to me and what happened to the individual I'm going to talk about this evening. And I believe that the conspiratorial and the paranormal angle intersect perfectly into this particular case, which is why I find it so interesting. I also believe an injustice was committed as well, and I hope I can set the record straight. This is the person we're talking about this evening, and her name is Helen Duncan. She was born in 1897 in Perthshire, Scotland, and not many people have heard of her, actually, but I consider her one of the most unusual and remarkable people of the 20th century. And what happened to her, I think, is incredibly revealing, and it happened a long time ago. We're going to talk about something that happened 81 years ago, but it's still an open case. It's still being researched, it's still being investigated, and new information is still coming to light. And I've been assisted in this project by several other people, including a lady called Margaret Hahn, who is the granddaughter of Helen Duncan and is leading the campaign to get her pardoned, as well as getting more information, is leading the campaign to get Helen pardoned. And I'm going to go through this particular presentation through the course of, which is a shorter version of a longer presentation I do when I go into more details. But so this is like the short, because I know I've only got about an hour, I think, to talk. And I'd like to also to listen to what you have to say and any questions you'd like to ask me. Now, Helen Duncan was what's known as a medium, and of course a psychic medium, which of course you are quite common in this day and age. There's even some very famous ones you see on TV. And there's different kinds and different types of psychic medium. There's some who will literally be on television. They'll sit there and they'll talk, and I'll go, "Is there anyone in the room called John? I can feel myself coming to a John over here. Is there anyone called John, or maybe Sarah over here?" That's one type. That's the most common type, that kind of clairvoyance. But there are other forms of mediumship which are, I'd say, more elite and more and less common. They're rarer. In the course of my research for this, I did actually attend a séance myself. I don't have time to tell you that story, but it was quite remarkable. Helen Duncan was actually what's known as a manifestation medium, which is probably the most elite level of this particular field. Now, how you interpret that will depend on your beliefs, whether you believe Helen was actually conjuring spirits of the dead, or whether she was a con woman involved in some kind of fraud. And I know many people have believed she was one or the other. I know that for certain. If you Google her name, at some point you will come across these photographs. These are photographs, as it says here, phantoms photographed during a séance with Mrs. Duncan. Now, this image here apparently shows Helen in trance. You can see Helen is the woman sitting there with the blindfold, and you can see ectoplasm coming out of her nose, because she was believed to be a manifestation medium. Ectoplasm was this substance said to exude from the medium's body in various different ways. It was described as being like a milky or yogurt-like substance that would hang in the air and form shapes. And these shapes would often transform into the physical images of spirits. And this is allegedly a photograph of Helen taken while she's involved in a séance. Now, this photograph is often comes up with people who disbelieve that Helen was real, and in fact, you can see quite clearly that what these spirits are dummies. The faces appear to be made of papier-mâché. It's like a shape from papier-mâché, I'd guess, and painted. And the bodies are created by draping what looks like a white sheet over the top of them. And the shoulders are coat hangers. You can see quite clearly. You can even see the kinds of coat hangers that were used. The one on the left, it's one of those arch-shaped coat hangers. And with the one on the right, you can see it's one of those long, straight coat hangers with little bits sticking up at the ends. Now, someone I know in Australia actually investigated this and found out that these photographs were taken by someone called Harvey Metcalf in 1928. They were published in an Australian magazine, but they were never actually originally intended, at least this was the photographer's and the original publisher's intention, was that these were never meant actually to be pictures of Helen in trance. They were a simulation, a reproduction, using the best special effects that anyone could come up with at the time when Metcalf actually did this shoot with Helen. And I suppose Helen could even have made these herself. I don't know. It's hard to say. But Helen actually did practice as a medium. She claims she's had these experiences her whole life. She started doing seances in 1926 and would manifest these kinds of spirits. And there's other things such as noises, raps, which is like a noise like that. She can create things like that. And this got her into a lot of trouble. She was a very controversial figure. She had a very fiery personality as well. She found it quite easy to get into arguments with people and things like this. And so as a result, she ended up having various problems with various people. She didn't get involved in research. I don't have time to tell you the story of the research that was done into her, but it's a very interesting subject indeed. Now, this is not Helen, obviously, but this is based on witnesses and what they describe at her seances. This is more likely what you would see as opposed to the Metcalf photographs. I don't know what this photograph is, whether it's real. There's no attribution to this photo that I'm aware of, but it's this substance, this white, sort of opaque substance, almost liquid-like, that hangs in the air. That's how it was described. So that's the kind of thing you would have seen probably if you were at one of her seances, according to the witnesses. The seance procedure, it depends on the medium. It depends very much on who the medium was. Helen had a particular methodology of her own, and it was based around the fact that she wanted very much for people to believe her. And I think this may have been inspired by some of the research that was done in the early 1930s into her abilities. despite the fact this ended very badly, I think she took on board the experience, and it maybe have inspired her. During the seance, there'll be what's called the spirit cabinet, which would simply be a curtain, which would be around the enclosure where the seance would begin with her entering it and sitting in a chair. Helen would be dressed quite simply in a black shawl, so a black dress, and usually nothing else. In fact, she would just strip herself naked and get a nurse would actually search her entire body to see if she was concealing anything in any particular place. You know what I mean? It must have been very, very embarrassing for her, not least because she would do this in public because she wanted the audience to believe her. Dressed in a simple black dress and slippers, she then used to come through into the seance room, which was very often just a room in somebody's house, an enthusiast who maybe wanted to do these in their own room. Sometimes these would be in public or purpose-built spiritualist churches. And once she was in the cabinet, then the lights would be dimmed. Usually there'd be one 40-watt red bulb. It wouldn't be complete darkness. There was like a 40-watt red bulb, and sometimes she requested someone puts a cover on that, a thick shade, to lower the light level even more. Now, depending on your beliefs, there's an explanation for this depending on your beliefs. On the one hand, Helen told everyone, indeed this is quite common among manifestation physical mediums, that the spirits couldn't stand bright light. Once this ectoplasm appeared, it had to be in darkness because they couldn't stand it otherwise. In fact, the bright light would actually damage them and might injure the medium. It would cause the ectoplasm to shoot back into the medium's body, which apparently could cause burns and problems like that. If you don't believe her, then it's very simple. The darkness was there to conceal trickery. Spirit trumpets, strings, things on strings, extra actors and actresses dressed in strange clothes who would enter and pretend to be the spirits. The darkness, of course, could conceal those things. Now, she practiced all through her life, and then World War II began. World War II began in 1939, and suddenly her services were far more needed now, and much more in demand. It was a bit of a boom industry for spiritualism, not least partly because of the fear of not knowing what was going to happen. And we know how it ended. We look back at it as some kind of piece of history, almost like it feels almost fictional, actually, from people who weren't alive at the time. Yet to be in the middle of it and not know how it was going to end was quite worrying. I mean, with things like Dunkirk, etc., at the beginning, it looked like the Allies were going to lose. And there was the Blitz, there was rationing. At the end of the war, 300,000 British troops would be killed. 60,000 people would be killed in the Blitz at home. And so Helen basically went on tour. I don't think she ever went abroad, but she toured the entire country. And she spent most of her time going from one spiritualist church to another, or from one location, one home to another. And in 1941, in fact, was it May of 1941, the 27th of May 1941, she was doing, this was very faithful actually, she was doing a seance at a location, a venue in Edinburgh, and one of her spirit guides came forward. These were spirits that would appear, who were not actually the spirits who were being summoned, but they were people who were in the spirit world who acted as kind of her guides, or almost as a master of ceremonies, who would appear first before the other spirits arrived. And so Albert, this is an old Australian man who was one of her guides, appeared in ectoplasmic form. There's allegedly a photograph of Albert as well. I don't have it with me, but there is one. And he said, "I'm sorry to announce that a British battleship has just been sunk. I have 1,400 of her officers and men with me right now, newly arrived in the spirit world." And everyone was shocked. What? We didn't know anything about this. Now, incredibly piece of bad luck on Helen's part, one of the people in the audience was a man called Brigadier Roy Firebrace, who was head of Army Intelligence for Scotland. He was also an occultist, a spiritualist, a member of the Scottish SPR, very, very keen on this particular subject, very, very interested in the paranormal. And so he was astounded by this. And so he went immediately back to his office and he got on the encrypted phone to Whitehall, and he phoned the Ministry of Defence, and he says, "What's all this about a ship that's just been sunk? I've just heard that a rumour that a ship has just been sunk." And the person at the other end said, "Don't worry, sir, we have no information. I don't think it's true." So Firebrace went, "Oh, she's a loony." I mean, even though he believed in this sort of thing, he knew there were some people faking it. Problem is, the following day he got a call back from the same person saying, "Oh, I made a mistake there. A ship has been sunk. HMS Hood has just been sunk in the North Sea." And yes, and guess how many sailors drowned on board the ship? 1,400. And Firebrace was astonished. He realised that Helen Duncan was receiving information about the war, about what was going on, through the testimony of spirit. She was receiving it outside the normal chain of command, or outside the normal chain of information. And and this, of course, meant that it couldn't be controlled. And he began to wonder if at some point she might start giving away classified information. And as a result, because whether you believe she was real or not, he did. He believed she was real, and so did many other people. And in fact, we know there was a letter in existence in which Firebrace wrote to MI5 at that time, in May of 41, recommending that MI5 keep an eye on Helen Duncan, because he thought, well, if she's given away information like that, and our side keeps an eye on her, he said we have to, because we can damn sure the enemy will be as well. If word gets out that she's given information like this about the war, the enemy will put their own spies in her audience as well. Now, we don't know specifically whether she was ever watched by the intelligence services. That information has never been declassified if it exists. But I think we can work out she probably was. And not least because on November the 25th, 1941, she was actually at a different venue. This is at the Master Temple in Portsmouth, which I've been to, actually. It's very interesting. It's just somebody's home today, but it was actually a special room above a chemist shop that was used by someone called Mr. and Mrs. Homer as a dedicated spiritualist venue. She was doing a seance there, and Albert appeared and says, "I'm sorry to announce that another British battleship has been sunk. I have 800 of her officers and men newly arrived here in the spirit world." And now we don't know exactly what the fallout from this was, but we do know that she was actually it's believed she was referring to the ship HMS Barham. This is the ship you see here in this photograph. This is taken from another ship. This was in the Mediterranean Sea. HMS Barham was very similar to Hood. She was an Admiral-class battlecruiser. It was a major surface combatant. This is actually one of the most powerful ships the Royal Navy possessed at the time. And here she is being sunk. She was struck by torpedoes and sunk. And yes, indeed, 800 of her personnel sadly perished in this disaster. The ship actually exploded and it just went down to the bottom of the sea. Again, this is similar to the Hood situation, and it's likely, I believe, that this rang some bells and raised some red flags in the corridors of power in London, although we don't know specifically. But I mean, we do know she was left alone for a few more years. She was left alone for a number of years. We know because, in fact, it would be easier for her to think that nothing really had gone wrong until January of 1944, which is when she was back at the Master Temple in Portsmouth, and something astonishing happened, something that was incredible. I mean, this was beyond anything she could have expected or believed. There was a police raid in January 1944 at the Master Temple, and she was arrested, and she was dragged off to the police station. Now, she was expecting possibly to get a fine and things like that under the Vagrancy Act, she was used to doing this because at the time this could be applied to mediums who were practicing in certain circumstances. This has happened to her before. But no, she was actually, her accusers escalated this to an almost unbelievable level. She found herself taken to the Central Criminal Court of London, the Old Bailey, where she was prosecuted under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. This was a moribund piece of legislation that was only on the statute books because no one could get enough MPs together to repeal it. They couldn't be bothered to get enough MPs to repeal it. And so it basically been dusted off and used to prosecute Helen Duncan. This was extremely astonishing and confusing, and she must have realised, indeed, lots of people must have realised, that there was some kind of secret subtext to this entire affair. And you can see in this newspaper photograph of Helen and her husband walking to court, she looks very perturbed, and as well she might. This was incomprehensible to her, what had happened. It really, really was. But that's what they did. And in March of that year, the trial began. And the 1735 Witchcraft Act was repealed in 1951, replaced with the Fraudulent Mediums Act. But if I can remember the text of it, it goes, against the conjuration of spirits and crafty knowledge. I can't remember the actual wording of it. But basically, it was used to prosecute people who were the pretense of the conjuration of spirits and demons and things like that. And this is why they were actually using it. Now, contrary to popular belief, she was not the last person prosecuted under the Witchcraft Act. She was the second last, but she was the last one to be convicted. And this is the first time law had been used, I believe, in over a century. And this is the location where the trial took place. This is the court number 4 at the Old Bailey. And Helen would actually sat in the dock here in the foreground, the dock area. The jury benches to the left, the witness box there you can see in the corner, and the judges were all seated along the far wall. In the pit here was where the barristers conducted the case, and everything else was done. And so she found herself in court facing this strange trial, this strange criminal charge. Now, it's interesting when you look at the personnel involved in this trial. The prosecution barrister was John Cyril Moore, KC, who was a very high-level barrister. He was Eton educated, read law at Oxford. He was a member of one of the Inns of Court, these quasi-Masonic organisations that the conspiracy theorists among us will always point to. And also, like many people during the war, he had 2 jobs. He had his day job, essentially, which was being a barrister. But he also had his wartime job, which was to be head of Section B19 at MI5. Now, Section B19 was a human intelligence outfit that was specifically established to track down the source of rumours. So this is kind of the institution that would be employed to run any kind of monitoring or surveillance operation on Helen Duncan. We don't know specifically; there's no records available that prove that, but that is actually where what we believe is likely that I believe was done. So, in a sense, Maud may well have been leading the surveillance operation against Helen Duncan and switched hats or put his wig on to prosecute her when she was finally in court. Now, the judge was a man called Sir Gerald Dodson. He was the Recorder of London, which is like the head judge at the Old Bailey. And he was a former Royal Navy officer, very, very much involved in Royal Navy welfare charities, felt very passionately about his cause. And indeed, there is a letter from the Department of Public Prosecutions, today the Criminal Prosecution Service, specifically recommending that Dodson preside over this case, specifically. Now, a guy called Robert Hartley, he wrote a book called The Helen Duncan Show Trial, which I very much recommend. I'll show you a cover of it later. It's not easy to get hold of, though. It's out of print. It came out in 2007. He believes he's discovered the kind of linchpin figure in this entire cabal, because it does sound like this is starting to sound like some kind of secret cabal that was involved in this. And it's a man called Commander Ian Fleming. He was essentially the Navy's, he was fire brace's opposite number in the Royal Navy. He was deputy head of Royal Navy Intelligence. He's also had a long career. He was at the end of a long career. He'd actually been involved in the Moscow show trials and the Spanish Civil War as well. And indeed, he was involved specifically in disinformation during World War II. That is, he created fake documents for the enemy and then essentially leaked them to the enemy to make the enemy believe that the Allies were going to do things they weren't going to do, so they could surprise them. So a very interesting story. Does the name Ian Fleming sound familiar to you? He also created James Bond, who is, of course, a character who wrote some books, who was a subject of novels, and now is the star of a very successful film franchise that continues to this day. There's actually a James Bond film, Live and Let Die. I don't know if any of you've seen it, which is a very interesting one, actually, where Bond, I think it's Sean Connery's Bond. He's the bad guy, played by Yaphet Kotto, and his partner, the woman, his partner, who Bond seduces, which of course is a common theme in these films. She's into tarot, and she actually reads tarot and things like that. And indeed, Fleming was involved in occult and paranormal activities as well. He knew vibration. They both knew Aleister Crowley, apparently. So again, Fleming would have understood exactly what was at stake here. Now, whether you believe Helen was real or not doesn't matter. The fact is that the establishment did. Members of the establishment believed that she was a real psychic medium. Helen Duncan was actually defended by a man called Charles Loseby. He was not a barrister, but he was a solicitor who was very passionate about the spiritualist cause. He was a spiritualist himself, and was actually he passionately believed and wanted to defend all spiritualists who were persecuted under the law in those days. This, I think, maybe led him to commit some serious errors. Now, this trial, because this trial was essentially a battle of witness testimony, the chief witness for the prosecution was Lieutenant Stanley Worth. Now, he was a guy involved in the police raid, along with PC Rupert Cross, who was a special constable from Portsmouth. Now, Cross actually also knew a guy called Chief Constable Arthur West. He was a friend of the family, the Chief Constable of Hampshire Police. And this was the man who gave a very damning character assessment on Helen at the end of the trial, calling her a pest on society, a ruthless and heartless exploiter of the vulnerable, giving the judge no alternative but to give her the maximum sentence for the offence, which was 9 months. And so Cross knew West. West was also the chief prosecution witness of another case that Maud was conducting in another court, which is a strange coincidence. It's just an odd turn of events. Now, the story goes that during the raid, it was all set up. There were policemen actually waiting outside the Master Temple, parked in their cars, just waiting for a signal from Worth, Worth and Cross were in the audience. Worth actually got into this very strangely. He claimed that he'd gone to the spooks, he called it. It was a bit of fun with his friends. Rather than go down the pub or cinema, they'd go to the spooks, which means going to a seance, to watch a seance. And he had to pay 12 shillings, which is the equivalent of about £130 today, so it was actually quite expensive. And so he went in there saying that he was expecting to see something truly remarkable. And instead, he claims he saw Helen Duncan just prancing about with a king-size bedsheet over her to make her look like a ghost. Almost like a comedy Scooby-Doo-like scenario. And then he said he thought it was his quest, therefore, to bring her to justice. And so he decided completely on his own account, he said he was spying on his own account, whatever that means, he decided to go to the police and report her. Now, there's several problems with this. Firstly, Loseby asked him at one point if he was a member of the intelligence services, and he said, "No, sir." Well, that was a lie. By that time, he had sworn in, so this was perjury. He was a member of the Royal Navy Provost Special Investigation Division, which is essentially, he was a detective. He was essentially a police detective within the Royal Navy Provost. And he lied under oath. And then the story goes that he and Cross were in this seance, and at the right moment, when Helen appeared wearing this bedsheet, he blew a whistle. And at that moment, the police all rushed into the Master Temple. They switched on the lights, and they detained everyone there. And Cross and Worth, as soon as they blew the whistle, they stood up. They were in the second row, very close to Helen. It's quite a small room, this Master Temple. I've been in it. It's quite a small room. They reached forward and grabbed this fake ectoplasm. They grabbed this bedsheet. And the police came in, arrested Helen, and detained everyone there. Now, there was one major problem, which is the bedsheet. Where was it? Now, Loseby, I don't think, did enough to press Worth on this point, because Loseby had an ace up his sleeve, which didn't work in the end. He said to Helen, he said to Worth, he said, "Well, did you, obviously in the chaos of a police raid, and you had your hands on this fake ectoplasm, this bedsheet should be a court exhibit." It was a large piece of cloth. I mean, you've seen photographs of Helen. She's no ballerina. This would have been like a king-size bedsheet at least to cover her entire body. But it wasn't there. And Worth said, well, his reply was incredible. He said, someone must have hidden it in a police raid where everyone's detained and the need to gather evidence is actually paramount. Somebody apparently hid this king-size bedsheet somewhere and got away with it. And managed to sneak in out of the Master Temple without any of the officers finding out. And Worth himself, who was involved in this raid, would have understood, being a detective himself, he would have understood the need to preserve this as a court exhibit. Yet it wasn't there. And to say, well, someone must have hid it is a classic circular argument. It's like, well, where's the bed sheet then? Well, we couldn't find it. Why couldn't you find it? Someone must have hid it. Yeah. So, but at that point now, this is where the offence allegedly happened. This is 301 Copner Road, Portsmouth. In this building, underneath here, in the bottom floor, there's it used to be the Homer's chemist shop, and it's now the 301 Jewelers. And they have a flat above, which is where they live, where they kindly allowed me to visit. And I actually have some film footage in the longer version of this talk, where I can show you exactly what happened. And basically, it's just someone's flat now. But this is where it all allegedly happened. People would go in through this door, go up to the top, and that's where it all happened. And if you want to know more, it's all published in this here, the trial of Mrs. Duncan. But you see, incredibly, Loseby was kind of waiting. He was waiting for the next part of his trial, where he actually said, "This is almost unbelievable." I'm going to get this, just get the text exactly right. What he was saying: if Mrs. Duncan is a materialization medium, then there is a spirit world near her at the moment, and a guide right here, possibly waiting for an opportunity to help her. Let us call him. Yes, here in the Central Criminal Court of London. Why not? She requires a curtained-off partition and a red light, nothing more. It's incredible, but Loseby was suggesting that they hold a seance in the court. So he thought, let's just get Helen to perform in the court, the seance, in front of the jury, in front of the newspaper reporters, everyone. And then this will get the case dismissed in one fell swoop. The problem was, and maybe he was a bit naive in this respect, the judge refused permission. They did need permission from the judge, and the judge refused permission. Loseby appealed, and in the end, Dodson allowed him to poll the jury, and the jury elected not to. Now, this is astonishing. WTF? I mean, if you were on that jury, would you have voted no? I mean, sheer curiosity alone. I mean, you have to pay 12 shillings to see this sort of thing normally. And this would not only be the chance to see a seance for free, but also a chance to watch history being made. Because just imagine the common law precedent this would have set up. And I think I can't go into details now, but that may be another reason why Dodson said no. It went beyond the simple Helen Duncan case. And unfortunately, after this, the defense case collapsed and Helen was unfortunately convicted. Now, this is the book I recommend. If you get hold of this, I do have a copy here. I can't lend it out, unfortunately, because it is very rare, but there are a few second-hand copies floating around. Now, this connection between the paranormal and warfare goes back a long way. This is Julius Caesar, who used to consult a soothsayer before going into battle. So did other people, Alexander the Great, several centuries earlier. In the Middle Ages, the King of France, I think it was 1412, so this was during the siege of Orleans, during the war with the English, and he put a 14-year-old girl in command of the army called Jeanne Roumet from the village of Arques. And under her guidance, he believed she was receiving divine guidance from God, the French beat the English at the siege of Orleans. Unfortunately, the English captured Jeanne and burned her at the stake, and she's gone down in history as Joan of Arc. And during the Cold War, there's remote viewing, psychic spying of various kind, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is quite a funny film. It's not as informative as the book, though, by John Ronson. I do recommend that. And you may have seen the film Third Eye Spy. So there's nothing new about this. And indeed, the other side were doing it. Hitler had Maria Ortiz, who was a medium, and Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the Ahnenerbe, who again was an occultist. And indeed, you may have seen the movie, The 7 Years in Tibet, about how they went around the world looking for these artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant, which is covered in the brilliant first Indiana Jones film, and things like the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail. Oh yeah, this is nothing new. Some people claim there was this massive climate of woo hanging over the government. And if there were, it wouldn't be the first time. But believe it or not, Winston Churchill was not involved. A lot of people claim that he was. He even visited Helen in jail. According to Margaret, that's not true. And in fact, we have a Churchill actually said this. He said he sent this memo to the Home Secretary. When he heard about this, he actually heard about this by reading it in the newspapers. And he said, let me have a report on why the Witchcraft Act of 1735 was used in a modern court of justice. What was the cost of this trial to the state? Observing the witnesses were brought here from Portsmouth and maintained here in this crowded London for a fortnight, and the recorder kept busy with all this obsolete tomfoolery to the detriment of necessary work of the courts. So despite the fact he's famous for being a spiritual believer, he wasn't involved. Now, I put it to you, to use legal language. This is from 1995. Jail as a witch, branded as a spy. I put it to you, as they say in the law in court, an alternative hypothesis. Because on the 6th of June 1944, while Helen was languishing in Holloway Prison, there was a massive amphibious landing of northern France. History would know it as D-Day. D-Day was the planning for D-Day was a very top-heavy conspiracy, to use my terminology, which involved a huge amount of secrecy, and it would only take one person involved to die and appear in one of Helen's seances, and an enemy spy to be in the audience for the secret to be blown. And Ian Fleming was involved in this. Pardon me, he was involved specifically in this information. So the alternative view is they used agents within the judiciary and police to concoct a fake case against Helen Duncan to make sure she was put somewhere where she couldn't practice in the run-up to D-Day. That's what I believe happened here. I mean, it's unfair. Why didn't they just pay her off? I mean, they could have just she was a patriotic woman, you know, they could just paid her some money and said, don't practice for a few months, you know, and she'd have been behind it. Like most people, she was behind the war effort, and it would probably cost less than the trial, actually. This is a picture of Helen after she was released from prison. She went back to practicing, but she never completely recovered from the ordeal of her criminal prosecution. She was very bitter that she hadn't been allowed to perform a seance in court. She badly wanted to go along with Losby's idea. She was very much behind it, and indeed she probably persuaded him to do it, but then the judge kiboshed the whole thing, and that essentially condemned her to jail. She has amazing, they say the eyes are the window on the soul, and there's big windows here, I think, with a lot inside. But she looks different from that photo I showed you earlier, which was taken in her youth. She looks more perturbed here, more world-weary. In 1956, she performed her last seance at the West Bridgeford Spiritualist Church. Now, I don't have time to go into details, but there was a raid there, and a couple of weeks later, she was killed. And many people believe it was a consequence of this police raid that killed her, even though her death certificate reads differently. And to be fair, she was not a well woman. She was generally in poor health. She was very badly overweight, had diabetes, things like that. So she wouldn't have lived to a ripe old age anyway. But according to her supporters, Helen has been back ever since. And there's a campaign to pardon her. Now, this has been going on. This campaign has been going on in one form or another ever since her conviction in 1944. This is their official website now. This is run by Margaret Hahn, a researcher, a friend of mine, and Helen's granddaughter. And they've been trying to get like a posthumous apology and pardon. And it's been an uphill struggle until very recently. I'm sure this is someone you will recognize. He's actually on the £50 note. I mean, I don't know if any of you are actually rich enough to own a £50 note, but this guy's actually on there now. He's called Alan Turing. Now, this chap was a computer genius. He was a real whiz kid, to use modern language. He was a pioneer of electronics. He was the first person to come up with the idea of artificial intelligence. And he was one of the most important people in the history of World War II, and one of the most important people in the Allied war effort. And because he built the computer that broke the Enigma code. And there's a film called Enigma, which is really good, that's about that. And The Imitation Game is another one. I do recommend those movies. They're very good historical documentaries, or historical fictionalizations of a real story. Now, this guy should have been the greatest war hero of all, but it was not to be. In fact, what happened to Alan Turing after the war was tragic, and it was shameful. He was prosecuted under the Le Boucherie Amendment of the sodomy laws for lewd and indecent acts with another man. In other words, he was an out-of-the-closet homosexual. and he was convicted. It seems hard to believe these days. I mean, things have changed, luckily. He was threatened with jail because of his private life. But he was given a deal. He would be spared jail if he underwent medical treatment, supposedly to turn him straight. Now, this involved taking drugs which destroyed his physical and mental health. And in 1954, he injected an apple with cyanide and ate it. And ever since his death, there's been a massive campaign to pardon him, which has actually made huge progress. Now, the reason this is important from Helen Duncan's position is because what's good for Alan is good for Helen, because it's an identical legal situation. The LaBruche Amendment has been repealed now. It was in 1967 in England, I think in 1980 something in Scotland, or 1980s, early 80s in Scotland. And so there was what's her name, the First Minister. She actually came forward and she did make a speech apologising to Alan Turing on behalf of the Scottish judiciary, Nicola Sturgeon. She did an apology for Nicola Sturgeon. It was a very emotional moment. There were people crying in the audience and things like that. And indeed, Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister here in England, he did the same thing. So we now have a common law precedent, and there can now be an application for a pardon for Helen Duncan. And if the government turn their nose up at it, Helen's campaign can sue them. And and that's still in progress right now. Like everything in law, it's very, very slow, but there may be a pardon at some point, I hope. Now, if you like this particular subject, you might like my book, Roswell Rising, a Novel of Disclosure. It's available from all good bookshops now, priced £10, as are the 2 sequels that make up the Roswell trilogy. And it's basically fictional, but it's about this kind of thing that I talk about. What would happen if you got the truth instead of the lies? And it's a story that came to me, and I thought, well, I'll turn it into some books. And one book went into 3. So please do check those out. I'll sign them for you if I see you, hopefully, at a conference. And any more details? I'm Ben Emlyn-Jones, www.HPANWO.blogspot.com. And there's loads of there for you to peruse. So thank you very much, all of you, for listening to me. And I hope I haven't gone over time. Let me just stop the sharing. There we go. Hi.
That's wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
It's interesting to hear a subject of something that isn't really discussed within the paranormal society and circles very much. But I have written down a few notes while you were chatting away. As a self-confessed conspiracy theorist, how do you feel it reflects? Do you think it's a brave step trying to find pro-supportive evidence that she was wrongly accused?
Brave. I suppose you get a lot of opposition if you do that. I mean, to me, it just seemed obvious. It just seemed an obvious way of looking at it. When I first heard about this case, and I got in touch with Margaret, and we talked about it, and I explained I had this alternative media site, and she was very supportive of me. I feel that an injustice has been done, and I'd like to hopefully help put that right.
Mm. That's on the case of her being found guilty for witchcraft.
Mm.
How do you feel about her mediumship that was also questioned?
Right, that's something I address in the longer version of this talk. My personal belief, which is outside the scope of this particular shorter presentation, is I think she was real. Yes.
Mm. Obviously, she had the forethought of the boats that were being sunk within that you discussed earlier. Yeah, so that was a very good evidential thing to put forward.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I should have mentioned, the HMS Barham situation in particular is suspicious because the government actually kept it quiet because they were concerned about morale on the home front. In November of 1941, people were very frightened. And at the moment, we didn't know how things were going to go. They didn't even tell the next of kin for 2 weeks. And when they did tell the next of kin, they actually specifically told them, "Could you please not talk? Careless talk costs lives." You've seen the posters with people on the bus talking, and there's older adults behind them, that kind of thing. People were, "Please just don't tell anyone," that kind of thing. And so it is remotely. I mean, it's physically possible. It's not complete. It can't be ruled out that Helen got wind of this beforehand. To me, it seems unlikely. As for the Hood situation, same.
Did Helen have any connections of military in her personal life that she could have got any information from?
I don't know. It's just difficult to tell. I mean, things in those days, probably. I mean, in those days, most fit and able men were in some way involved in the military in the World War II. Her husband wasn't, because he failed the fitness test, but most others would have been, yeah, in some way or another. Like I said, Maud had these two jobs. He was a barrister and head of human intelligence at MI5.
I know a few secrets there, don't they?
I'm sure they do. Yes, they're still keeping a lot of these to do with this case. You know, you can help. Margaret's tried Freedom of Information Act requests, and it's come back not in the public interest. Even after 81 years, there's still things they don't want to talk about.
Maybe if she set up some kind of support, you know, with the government for releasing the information, if they have over 100,000 supports, then would it be something that would be shared then readily?
She's tried that, actually. She's in the process of doing that. I mean, she's started numerous petitions. She's approached the media. She was actually starred in a recent documentary, which you might have seen, called what was it called? It was on BBC just a few months ago, and I have the title. I did a review of it, but I think it's called not the Blitz Witch. That's another one. But there's been several media productions in which Margaret has taken part. There was a very good one, actually, with Elaine. It was partly fictional, with Elaine Smith, the famous Scottish actress, actually playing the role of Helen, which is very good.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have a look at that one. I wasn't aware of it before.
It's on BBC iPlayer, yeah.
BBC iPlayer, thank you. I'm sure we'll all go and log into that. While you were doing your talk, I managed to get hold of a copy of the very rare book. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, so there'll be one if anybody wants to borrow that at some point. I'm sure it'll be my personal copy, though. It's not an ASSAP one.
I'm glad there's still plenty left that you can buy them, and they're out of print. I hope it wasn't too expensive.
I managed to find one that wasn't. There were ones that were incredibly expensive at like £80 upwards. So I didn't pay that. No. But the last question before we move over, if Roy's still happy to ask the questions today, apologies that Christian's not here. He's allowed some time off eventually. I think we allow him.
He's on holiday, I believe.
To step away from this occasion. He's on holiday at the moment, so Roy's going to ask the questions in a minute. But the last one I'd like to touch on is, how do you think that technology has affected mediumship? Do you think it's improved the more that we've expanded our ability with AI and what we're capable of doing and achieving? Do you think that it's made it easier to fake stuff within that world, or do you think it's made it harder?
I'd say definitely easier. When it comes to visual evidence, I mean, it really just doesn't carry the same weight it used to. In fact, if you ask for photographs or images of ghosts, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, and you go online, there are so many of them. And some of them are obviously concocted. They're obviously fabricated images. And it's so easy to create really good fake images nowadays that we have a really pretty bad signal-to-noise ratio problem. To the point, and I'd say that if I was confronted by one of these phenomena myself and I had a camera, would I bother photographing it? I probably would, actually. But in the back of my mind, I'd think, people are just going to yell at me that I faked the whole thing. And unfortunately, in this day and age, they might be right. Only I would know that I didn't, but I could never prove that I didn't. It's very difficult. It was very difficult indeed. In terms of technology, we also have things like electronic voice phenomena, and I know several people have been studying that, which of course has changed over the course of advancements in technology, from wax cylinder discs to wax cylinders and discs to tape, like magnetic tape, to digital files now. Yet the strange phenomena appears on all of them. And there's even what might be called, some people are describing them as artificially intelligent ghosts. In other words, the AI systems are becoming haunted and they're creating horrific, demonic images and things like this. Again, this is difficult to prove, because you could always say to them, why I could go onto Grok now and say, make me a scary picture, and it will do it. And so unless there's like some kind of process by which this is done openly, this creation is done openly, it's impossible to prove that it's real.
Yeah, I suppose that's weighted in the favour of being able to spot stuff that's happened and also to create it. I know since I've been investigating, if I have the use of some technology now, I can drop it into some software and I can look at the parameters within that and as a visual as well as an audio. And sometimes it gives you a much better grounding to know that things are fake. But
Yeah.
do you think that any mediumship will be validated as it used to be back in those days?
To validate it, now that'd be interesting actually, to provide proof, which unconditional proof. It's funny enough, I was talking to Steve Mera about this just a couple of days ago. It's possible that the phenomenon itself is actually elusive and preventing us from having 100% proof, possibly because it may not be healthy for us. So I don't know if any of you have seen the film The Discovery. It's a film called The Discovery. It's about this mad scientist played by Robert Redford who finds proof of the afterlife. And as a result, millions of people across the world start killing themselves. Now, I don't believe that would happen personally. I don't think that would happen. But it's something that possibly some people are scared of. And maybe even elements within the phenomena itself are deliberately preventing us knowing too much in case it may affect us negatively. As I said to Steve Mera, some of these experiments are the victim of their own successes. But I mean, I've never come across a case ever that there won't be someone who disbelieves in it. There'll be someone who disbelieves it, and they'll put forward a comprehensive case why they think this is not real. I mean, for the various skeptics from James Randi to Susan Blackmore and others who will say, no, I've investigated this, it's not real, and this is why. I've never come across a case where they're completely stumped. And Helen Duncan has a lot of disbelievers who say she just made the whole thing up. She concocted the whole thing.
Again, on behalf of ASSAP, it's been an incredible talk. Thank you to raise some awareness and look at the subject in a little bit more detail, especially through the eyes of you, which is great that we've got that information that's come through.